Episode 99, Parenting Anxious Teens with Daelene Byam.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and certified through the Life Coach School. Together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
So many times in life, a solution is found when someone is ready for a solution or is allowed to come up with a solution on their own. Allowing a teen who is struggling with anxiety to desire help or voice what they need can be difficult for parents and even cause the parent to have anxiety about their child's anxiety. Coach Daelene Byam helps teens and young adults who struggle with anxiety, and she has found that parents have the most success when they don't try and push help and change onto their child, but allow space and time for the child to come to them for help. She speaks encouragingly to parents who have children who struggle with anxiety and gives some great tips on the podcast so a child's anxiety is much less likely to cause parental anxiety.
Well, welcome to the podcast, everybody. We are glad to have you here with us, and I am glad to have Coach Daelene Byam here with me. Hello, Daelene. It's so fun to have you here.
Hi, Heather. It's so fun to see you again. I love meeting with you.
I know. I love meeting with you too. We had a retreat for life coaches and Daelene came down for that. I say came down because she lives in Canada. Maybe she'll tell you a little bit more about that. Anyway, but we got to be together there and that was super fun.
So I love the retreat. It was so good and it was so fun just to be with all the coaches in the directory too. Like it's so good to see those people in person too.
Yeah, it is really fun. Well, Daelene, I introduced you a titch, I guess, by saying where you're from, but do you want to tell us a little bit more about you before we get started?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Daelene Byam. I coach teens that struggle with anxiety. And I say teens, but I have a lot of young adults in my program too that I work with. But yeah, I'm from Canada. We live just south of Calgary, Alberta, out in the country. I have 4 boys. My oldest is just graduated from college and is doing his thing up north from us. And then I have 2 married kids. And then my youngest is still at home. So all boys. I have four boys. And so we have a lot of adventures and a lot of fun. And a reason I coach with anxiety teens, and I like to share this, is because my second oldest, he really struggled with anxiety, really from day one. Like we would laugh at him when he said something funny and he would storm off to his room because he was so embarrassed that he was getting this extra attention. And we as parents didn't really know what was going on until later on in life for him. And so in high school, it really started showing up for him. And he's a high-level basketball player. And he would be out on the court and you could just see the anxiety going through him and he would just struggle and all of a sudden his whole game would fall apart. And so he had colleges looking at him too to come to their universities, but a lot of them were apprehensive because of his anxiety and how it was showing up for him. For him, it was showing up in anger and frustration. And as parents, we didn't understand that. Like that wasn't cluing into us that those two things were related. He went and played basketball at a college just south of us. And at the very beginning, you're kind of on trial, right? You're not for sure on the team. He wasn't for sure on the team because the coach wasn't convinced yet that he was a good fit for their team. And that's when his anxiety totally took over. He just fell apart. The kid could hardly get out of bed. He wasn't showing up in practices the way he needed to be, and he got cut from the team. And his whole world kind of fell apart because that was his biggest goal, was to play college basketball. And at that point, he knew he needed help. And then that's when he finally asked for it. Because all through school, all through high school, we'd be like, we can get you some help. Let's get you some help. And he just would not do it. And it was at this point that he actually got some coaching. And that is what really connected for him. And that's what really made a difference for him. And so once he started realizing what was going on and that his fits of anger were because he was trying so hard not to feel anxious, that anxiety was exploding into fits of anger for him. And once he could see that, kind of changed things for him. And he decided that he was just going to leave basketball and go on a mission. And so he went on a mission and just crushed it out there. And part of it was because he was accepting that he was anxious, because that didn't go away, that he had anxiety, and he made that connection with people and shared his struggle that he had and him overcoming that struggle. And he connected with people like you wouldn't believe. He connected with companions, he connected with families within the wards, and he connected with people that were interested in the gospel. And in his mission, it was a very low baptizing mission. And he baptized a whole family, which was really unheard of in that mission. And so he's since come home, and he's married, and he's actually starting his second business, and has just really done so well for himself. Now, he still feels anxious, though, is the thing. And that's something that I talk about a lot, is you're still going to feel anxious. It's just how you handle everything with it on top of it. And the other day, my husband was asking what's going on. He was home visiting, and he's pacing around, and he's like, I'm just feeling anxious for a minute, Dad. Just give me a second here. And it was so good to see that, instead of him holding it in and exploding, which still happens sometimes, right? Because, because
he's human.
Anxiety. Yeah, and he's human.
Yeah.
But we all know what's going on when it's happening now.
Right.
But it was just so good that he recognized that he was feeling anxious and just needed a minute to process it and allow it to be there, and to kind of figure it out for himself, and just to see the difference is so huge. And so that's when he first in university saw the coaching and kind of made that shift for himself, that's when I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is the people that I need to speak to, because if I can help even just a few teenagers not go through this huge struggle, or be able to handle it a little bit better, how great would that be? Because it's just so good to be able to feel like you have some control over your anxiety instead of letting it control you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love a couple things, many things about that story. But first of all, the anxiety manifested itself in a way that you didn't necessarily recognize. And I don't know that I would have put two and two together and recognized it that way either. But I think it's so important to note that things manifest themselves in very different ways. There's not like a textbook way that things show themselves.
Right. Yeah. Like we had no clue that those things were related until we started kind of figuring things out ourselves. And it was because he had such anxiety about people knowing that he had anxiety, which is so funny. Right. And so he's having anxiety about his anxiety, and then suppressing it all and holding it in all day long at school. So nobody thought he was different. And then it had to go somewhere. Right. And that just exploded in anger on his family. And so when he went away to college, there was nowhere for that to go, because he didn't have a safe place for that. And gratefully, he had, a place where people loved him at home, no matter what, even when he was frustrated and mad at us all for no reason. But when you're away at college, there's just, nowhere to have that happen.
Yeah, I can see how that would really, why it would come to a head at that particular stage. I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, there's not that safe place anymore for them to be able to.
Right. And that's why I love working with the university kids too, because it's such a big change and they don't realize it. And quite often when you struggle with anxiety, it really manifests itself in university when you're off and away without all those safe places that you have.
Well, and I'm just connecting a dot here too. I hear so many missionaries who go out and start struggling with anxiety. So the question to me is always like, what is it about a mission that's creating so much anxiety? And there is a lot of things, but also maybe they have been struggling with it before and they just didn't realize it. But because there is no safe place, there's no home to go home to where you can kind of let go of that a little bit in whatever way it manifests himself, then it really probably comes to a head. I don't know. That was,
I totally agree with that. I'm 100%. I do think they did have anxiety. It doesn't just all of a sudden show up, right? And whether it was just a small amount or bigger amounts that they just weren't recognizing. Yeah, it just kind of manifests itself. Because I agree, there's so many parents that are but they never felt anxious before. I think we just weren't seeing it.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that happen amongst friends and family members. And I had not really considered that. Yeah, they probably have been experiencing it before. We just didn't recognize it. So anyway,
Right.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, totally.
So as you were talking about your story with your son, I am curious, and this is probably the case for most parents who have anxious children. What is your experience? Do you feel like you experienced anxiousness? Do you feel like you had to learn? I'm just really curious what that looked like for you.
Yeah. So I feel like for me, I don't feel like I had a lot of anxiety as a person before I had an anxious child. But then as having an anxious child, we feel like we have to control so much for them to help them not feel anxious. I have a term for it. It's that snowplow parenting, right? It's the same kind of thing when we're trying to remove all those obstacles for our children so that they don't feel, whatever it is, but in this case, anxiety. And so then we're starting to feel anxiety about our own child's anxiety. So quite often parents of anxious children either have anxiety themselves or they have anxiety about their child's anxiety and have built that up because of their teenager's anxiety. So for me, that's what happened. Like I could feel it. Like even on the day he was so anxious. This is really cute. He was so anxious when he went to ask his now wife to marry him. And he knew it was going to be an anxious time. And for him, when anxiety shows up, and he gets like sick and he has to be in the bathroom. So we have lots of funny stories about that, which is funny. It's good that he can laugh about it now, but he like made a plan even within that he was going to, he needed to have a bathroom break in the process of what that whole day of what was going to go on. And he knew right before he was going to ask her, he was going to have to be in the bathroom for a minute to plan for it. But the point of it was that he was starting to get so anxious, and we knew he was going to get anxious, that I was getting so anxious. And even one of my boys had to say to me, my oldest son, he said, "Mom, you are being so anxious right now because of Garrett's anxiety." And I'm like, "Oh, you're right." I am. And I just need to take a second here because there's no reason for me to be anxious here. It's all him, right? Like I can do what I need to do on my part of it. Like, cause we were kind of helping him out in the background.
Yeah.
But I didn't need to let his anxiety be my anxiety, which happens so often. And I still have to remind myself because I'll fall into that trap so often. Because the problem is when we do that, they're down into that pit of anxiety. And if we go down with them, there's nobody helping them.
Oh yeah. There's no throw rope. There's nothing that I love that your oldest son had the words for that, was able to see it and was able to actually communicate that. Cause I think a lot of people wouldn't even recognize that either. They would just be like, what's going on here? Mom's crazy. He's crazy, but he was able
he's
to
a psych major.
Okay. Well,
right?
Then there we go. But I think we really do our kids a great service when we teach them language around those things. And we just use those terms. Yes, this is some anxiousness showing up. And, you're feeling anxious about that anxious. And I don't know. I just think it's super helpful to be able to have created the language to talk about it.
Well, and I think that's so important to have that open communication in your home, because yes, you're going to have probably one child that is more anxious than other children. And to understand that within your family dynamic is so important. And for other kids to understand it, and even like all of us understand, there's certain people in our family that do feel different levels of anxiety, and some of them are feeling it at a higher level, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It's all how we are, and it's how our family dynamic is. And we understand that, and we have compassion for it too.
Yeah, that is so important and so good. So obviously you have learned how to deal with this. I'm curious if you have tools or things that you would share with other parents on how to help them best manage themselves in situations like this.
Yeah. And I mean, in a perfect world, these are the things that we could do. And I think one of the things, the very first thing, is have compassion for ourselves too. Like, don't beat ourselves up when we do something wrong, when we don't necessarily handle it in the best way, because I know sometimes I still don't, right? Like I still get mad and frustrated sometimes. And I'm like, why is he acting this way or whatever? Even him as an adult. Because I mean, parenting adult children is, I find, so much harder than parenting our teenagers.
Yeah. And I guess it's not even parenting anymore, right? We still kind of want to call it that, but it's not. And that's part of
it's just being a positive influence, right? In their lives. But we take on that a lot. But anyways, that's the biggest thing, is just being compassionate on ourselves. But I think being compassionate on our child too, and dropping our expectations. Because a lot of the times we have expectations on how our children should behave and the way they should act and the things that they should be doing. Like, I have so many parents coming to me saying, I need them to go out and be with their friends. I need them to doing extracurriculars. I need them to be getting better grades. I need them to want to, apply to these colleges. Well, do they really need to be doing all those things? I don't know. Maybe they really don't want to. Yeah. So I think it is a little bit of a fine line on that one of, is it their anxiety speaking to them on those things, or do they really not want to? Mm-hmm. And so kind of talking to your child and differentiating before, but you really have to drop your expectations first on what you expect them to be doing and how you expect to be behaving. And I think it's a hard thing, especially as members of the church too, that we have this expectation that they should be going to activities, they should be going to seminary, they should be, showing up for church, and they should be following the word of wisdom and all these things that they could be not doing. And it's so hard to drop those expectations and to kind of see where they're at. And is it their anxiety speaking, or is it really them and them not wanting to do those things? And then kind of going from there. So that's one of the things that I think is really important, is kind of dropping that and seeing how that goes and going from there. Because a lot of it comes back as us worried what other people are going to think about us in our parenting.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's a really easy one to fall into. And one I don't even know that we recognize a lot of times. We don't really see that, my why behind having this expectation is so that other people can perceive that my kid's a good kid, or that I'm a good parent. Right. There's both. We worry about what people think about not just ourselves, but what they're going to think about our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And because we want people to think well of our children.
Yes.
But in the end, if you have children that are kind, who are kind to others, who give service, and who are, kind of doing stuff to better themselves, that's the most important thing, right? And the most important thing is to have that relationship with our child.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to carry on for the rest of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not whether they went to seminary. That's not going to make a difference. In 5 years, is it going to matter if they went to seminary?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, I know. I think we think a lot of times, if my kid does this, this, and this, then it's going to be smooth sailing for them in their life, right? If I could get them through high school and to serve a mission or go to college, get married in the temple, then all is going to be well. And there is no guarantee, right? If your kid goes to seminary and graduates from seminary, if your kid goes on a mission, it really does not mean that they are going to retain a testimony, that they are going to have the happy life that we want them to have. Yes, I do believe that some of those things there can make their journey a little bit easier, but it doesn't guarantee anything.
Right. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to let go. And I get it, because my oldest son has left the church, but he did all the things right. Like he went to seminary, 100% attendance. He was the smartest kid when it came to church stuff. He went on a mission. He was like executive secretary in his YSA ward, like all these things. And then, he's not active now.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I think that's a hard part as a parent, for sure. That's hard, but I just have to hold on to my own experience and my own things and my own promises that I've made with Heavenly Father, and know that it'll all work out.
Yeah. That's where the work is for us, right? Is just having faith and hope in our Savior. And that's where we get to spend our focus, not so much in worrying about the choices that, our adult children especially are making, because we don't really have that influence anymore.
No. And we don't always have that influence as them as teenagers too. So anyway, sorry, kind of sidetracked there, but
yeah, yes, sidetracked, but I think those are important conversations. So
yeah, because I think it is a really hard thing to let go of and to be aware of too. And I know because I've been through it personally, right? And a little bit different as an adult child, but sometimes they decide this as teenagers too.
Yeah.
That the church isn't for them, right? And that's a hard thing. And that sometimes is a hard thing to look at. And I don't know. I just always kind of, when I'm thinking of other people who've left the church or whatever, is they know where the church is.
Mm-hmm.
They know how to find it again. And we just need to give them, that love and compassion and make them feel like that they're wanted and loved no matter what. And I think that's the same with an anxious child too.
Right. Like they need to know they're loved, because if that gets in the way of your relationship, there is never going to be anybody, that like you're not ever going to be the safe place that they're going to come to when they need you or when they need something at all, right? Like you have to maintain that relationship so that there is a place for them to feel safe.
Yeah.
So a couple of things we talked about in helping parents to manage themselves around with an anxious teen. You had compassion, you had dropping expectations. Do you have any other thoughts for us there?
Yeah, I think part of with the compassion is don't try and fix their problem.
Ooh, that's a hard one.
Because quite often we do that, right? We come in and we're like, hey, you should do this or whatever, right? Yeah. So I think it's really important to not try and fix it with them. I think it's a good thing to like be an example more in showing them how you handle your anxiety and how you handle your big emotions, and showing examples that way is a really good way. I think talking strategies with them if they want it, but sometimes they don't. Like sometimes you just need to say to them, hey, I can see that you're feeling whatever. If it's really obvious, say anxiety, but you could say, hey, I feel like you're feeling some big emotions right now. What is it that you're feeling? And ask them what they're feeling. Don't just always assume. And kind of go from there. And then talk to them a little bit about what you do when you're feeling, and say, do you want some suggestions? Do you want some help? Maybe they don't want help. And sometimes you can read it and tell they don't want to help. They just want to tell you what's going on. And hopefully they can tell you, right?
Yeah.
And let you know.
Yeah, that is so good.
But don't try and fix it.
And I love that you said, and you don't have to tell them also what they're like, try not to label it yourself, let them label what they're experiencing, because I think we do sometimes assume something that is completely off the mark. And,
right.
And then that can lead them to more of like, oh, well, should I be feeling this way? Then they start to second guess themselves from what they're already experiencing. So.
Yeah, exactly. And quite often what they go to tell you is completely different than what you think that you're going to get from them, right? And it could be something completely different, but it's so important no matter what it is. Because I had this happen this summer. Like I just had this feeling one of my kids was going through something, and I rearranged my plans and everything and made it so that I could be there with him by himself and just talk to him. And what he was going to tell me was totally not what I thought it was going to be. And I was just like, whoa, this was not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And so just don't let it surprise you outwardly. Obviously, inwardly, it could surprise you.
Right. I think you do have to get good at that as a parent, having that kind of poker face. And how great that you actually made yourself available, that you could tell. And so you just made it happen. You probably didn't force anything upon him, but like you made yourself available for those conversations.
And you really do need to make yourself available for it. And when the Spirit prompts you, you have to listen. And I don't know what the Spirit was telling me, except that I knew that my son needed to tell me something. And he didn't know he needed to tell me. He wasn't planning on telling me, but I knew something was causing something for him. And I could see this emotions and anxiety building in him. And I knew he needed to have that opportunity to share it with me. So I didn't force it. I didn't say, you have to tell me anything. I just said, I can tell something's going on here. I don't know if you want to share with me, but I felt impressed that I need to. And make sure you share with them that you feel the Spirit. I felt the Spirit tell me that I needed to ask you if there's something going on. And so then they know that there's that divine intervention there too, like directing you to it. And sometimes that softens their heart a little bit to share what's going on too.
Yeah. And then they know that it's not only you that is concerned about them, but there is heavenly parents that are very aware of them as well.
Right. Yeah. And don't downplay it, and don't, be like, well, that's not really anything or whatever, or you shouldn't be feeling that way. I feel like we do that a lot too. You shouldn't be feeling that way. You shouldn't feel anxious. This is silly kind of thing, right? Or there's no reason to feel that way. But then again, it's the same thing. Like, you're telling them they shouldn't be feeling some way, and then they feel bad about it, and then they're not going to share again, right? Then they're not going to tell you, or they're going to hold it in and keep it inside. And so I think that's an important thing too, is just being open to any of it. So, and then talk strategies if they're interested. Talk about, do you want me to help you with this? I think is such a great way. Just being open and honest about it. Do you want help solving this problem? Do you want help feeling less anxiety? Do you want help figuring out what is causing you this? Because sometimes it's just finding the source, right, too? Like, let's figure out what's causing this for you. Like, let's backtrack here.
Yeah.
What is it that's causing this for you? And
I find that for me, even if whether I'm dealing with an anxious child or not, but asking them that question, do you want help with this? Most often the answer I get is no. And it's so hard for me at that point to then take that no for face value and not try to intercede and push myself into the situation. That's the hardest thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to know that if the answer is no, then just say to them, you just let me know if it ever changes. And I'm open to that anytime. And they probably will come back to you. But if you force it, then they're not going to want to share with you, because they feel like they have to, right? And teenagers don't like to do things they have to do.
No, they don't. And to be honest, I don't like to do things that I feel like I have to do either. So it's not just teenagers, but I've been that way my whole life. So I don't know.
Right. And I'm like the opposite too. I'm doing the opposite then. But just provide opportunities then. Drive in a car somewhere with just them. Like, I know it's harder when they're driving themselves, because you're not getting that one-on-one time with them, but just be like, hey, I'm going to the store. I'm just wondering what you want to buy. Come and pick out some stuff that you really want and come with me to the store. And then just give them that time to drive and sit there and just, have a conversation with them. Don't pry, because they'll hate it, but hopefully they'll come out and tell you what's going on and what they're feeling and why they're feeling anxious, what's going on for them. And then kind of go from there. But you really do have to create this rapport with them. And I think the biggest thing is not overreacting to the small stuff that's going on in their lives, so that when there is this big stuff going on, that's really holding them down, that they will come to you with it.
Such a good point. Okay. So then on the flip side is, you as a parent are trying to, manage yourself and be helpful to a teen who is struggling with anxiety. But oftentimes we have these kids that they don't want the help. They're not trying to get an education on anything like that. Like, parents, I think, are pretty proactive in trying to get some help. But then we have teens that they don't necessarily want to do any of the work themselves sometimes.
Right.
So what do you do then?
I think the best thing is just let it be. If you're forcing anything, if you're telling them they need help, if you're telling them they need to fix something, again, they're just going to feel bad about themselves and feel like there's something wrong with themselves, and they shut down and they don't want to share with you. They don't want to tell you. They want to protect your emotions too, because they don't want you to feel bad that they're feeling bad. And so then they really shut down. So I think just letting it be, but being a good example and letting them know that this is what you do when you're processing your big emotions. I'm feeling a little anxious right now about what's going on here. I'm just going to take a minute and go to my room. Like, be open about it and be like, oh, I just messed up. I totally blew up on you all here. This is what I should maybe do next time. And just be an example of what you could do to process your own big emotions, and be vocal with them and show them and tell them, so that they can see that example in you. And hopefully they will start to do that for themselves. But you can't force them because you're just pushing them away. I remember saying to our son, we need to take you to a psychologist, and he would just freak out. And I just think that was so terrible that we did that. We were such bad parents. Because he's like, there's something seriously wrong with me. I have to go see a psychologist. And, they don't want to know that there's something wrong. And I think that's the most important. There's nothing wrong. This is so normal. Some people just feel more anxiety than others, but there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with them at all. And just letting them know this is normal for you to feel this way. This is normal for you to react this way. And quite often in these situations, it would be weird if they weren't being anxious, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other day, my daughter-in-law, she loves to call me and say, can you just coach me for a minute? And she goes, I'm feeling really anxious about this. They had a bunch of things. They were moving. They were both leaving their jobs. Like they were starting up a new business, putting a lot of money into a business. And she's like, I'm just feeling so anxious. Can you talk me so I won't be anxious? And I'm like, yeah, I can't do that. Sorry, honey. You should be anxious right now. It would be weird if you weren't anxious right now, right?
Yeah.
It would be so weird if you weren't anxious.
We hate that feeling so much that we just kind of want to talk ourselves out of it. And yes, I'm sure there was some things that your daughter-in-law could have done to kind of help take the edge off in some way, but that's part of our human experience is feeling that. And when we think there's something wrong with us for feeling anxious in big times in our life, when it's very normal to feel that way, we do a disservice to ourselves when we think that she shouldn't be feeling this.
Right. In reality, what happened when I said you should be feeling anxious right now, that would be weird if you weren't. She's like, oh, that just makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. That's what takes the edge off right there, right? Is just recognizing, oh yeah, like this is exactly how I should be feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a normal emotion right now in this circumstance. And sometimes for teenagers, it's more, this is a normal emotion for me to feel in this circumstance. Somebody else might not feel anxious in this circumstance, but for me, this is my normal. And that's okay. Nothing has gone wrong.
We're all so different. And comparison really does get us in trouble a lot of times. And especially in situations like this, when we think, oh, so-and-so doesn't get anxious in situations like this. Well, first of all, how do you know that? Like chances are they do, you just don't know. But second of all, it really doesn't do us any good to go into that thought, that train of thought, because where does it get us? It leads us nowhere useful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just helping us get anxiety about our anxiety.
Yeah.
And just build on to it. Right.
Yeah. So what would you say the end of the day, our number one goal would be, or should be? I don't want to use the word should, but what would our number one goal be with a child, with a teen who has anxiety?
I think the number one goal is just letting them know that they're normal and it's okay and nothing's gone wrong, but also that they can come to you for anything, that it's fine, that's the most important thing. This is my favorite story, and I share this with permission. But my son and his friends at EFY, we got a phone call in the middle of the night.
That's the kind of thing you always like.
Yeah. A phone call while they're at EFY. You're thinking, I don't even have to worry about this kid. They're at EFY right now, right? So we got a phone call and he's like, Mom, they had taken pictures of themselves posing with some statues, and the poses they made were a little inappropriate, but what they did, and this was a time when Instagram and hashtagging was fairly new. So they were a little clueless about it, but they hashtagged EFY and posted it.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much.
So we got a phone call in the middle of the night, like literally 2:00 in the morning. They pulled these kids out of bed. They're in so much trouble at EFY. They are telling them that they should be sending them home. Luckily, it was the last night, so they didn't have to come home. But I just said, that was so stupid. We'll talk about this the next day. So when my husband went to pick them up, he picked up a bunch of them, right? He picked them up 7:00 in the morning, took them all to McDonald's and just sat them down and said, what did we learn here? And just was like so calm and like, this was stupid. Yeah. And what did you learn? And what would you do next time? Kind of thing. And in doing that, he created that rapport with those kids. These boys are all married now. In college, they're older, and they all have that connection with my husband still because he created that connection with them. Mm-hmm. That safe place. He didn't overreact. He didn't freak out over something that really wasn't going to matter. And I think it's so important to think as a parent, is this going to matter in 5 years? Is this worth me wrecking my relationship with my child? Do I need to freak out at this? Mm-hmm. And most of the time it's not. And so just creating that rapport and that friendship with your child is so important so that they will come to you with the big stuff because they know you're not going to freak out.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of the freak out comes is because we do think sometimes this is going to matter in 5 years. Because if they make this decision today, then just like you look to the trajectory of what that decision, we make up all these crazy things in our head about, well, all is lost now because he hashtagged EFY with these pictures, right? We have this crazy, I want to say stupid, like this crazy, stupid ability to project way into the future what the consequence of a choice today is going to be. Right. And that is really unhelpful. Like we just have to see it for what it is for just this moment and not look to like what we think it's going to create ahead of time.
Yeah. And reality, the story that we're making up is not really realistic.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes we need to make a different story that probably is more realistic.
Well, they're both, either way, they're a story, right? Either way, it's just something you're choosing, your brain is coming up with. And so why not go the route of something that is going to be helpful for you to react, or not even react, but it's going to be helpful for you to act the way that you want to act in a situation.
Yeah. And the most important thing is that you have a love and connection with your child.
Yeah.
And that you're friends. That's the most important thing because that's what's going to carry on for way longer than them being a teenager.
Yeah. Which is just a small little period of time.
Such a small period. And we're just building that relationship that's going to be for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah. Oh, Daelene, this has been fantastic for me on so many levels, and I appreciate it so much. Will you share with people where they can find more of you before we go?
Yeah, for sure. I'm on Instagram at Anxiety Coach Daelene. It's DAELENE. I'm also on Facebook, Daelene Byam Coaching, and I have a website. It's just DaeleneByam.com.
Awesome. We will link to all of those things in the show notes, and we are so glad to have gotten to have this conversation with you today. And thank you to all of our listeners for being here. But Daelene, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather. That was so much fun.
Yeah, it was a good time. All right. See you next time, everybody. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.